Welcome to Chapter 6 of Soil Science and Management, and today we're going to talk about organic matter. We've talked about this in a few different areas leading up into this chapter, and today we're going to kind of focus on some of the different types of organic matter and how they're utilized in the soil and how they're derived. First, we're going to talk about what organic matter is and how it is formed. We're going to describe what that organic matter does in the soil. We're going to list several ways to help maintain soil organic matter. We're going to discuss something called nitrogen immobilization and how that can be an issue within your soil. We're also going to look at what organic soil is and how soil and organic matter and climate are related. So organic matter is the portion of a soil that contains all of the old animal and plant remains that could be in various stages of decay. And so these are the things that was at one time a living organism and are no longer active within the soil, but are now being broken down into smaller pieces. We have different states of decay. You have stuff that's fresh. You have leaf litter or lawn clippings that are just on the top, and then those are slowly broken down into ultimately into a humus, which is an active nutrient that plants can utilize inside the soil. What we're going to talk about really is called detritus, and that is going to be the decayed matter. And then basically that the definition of that is all of the fragments, the different decayed matter that are in the soils. And these contain carbohydrates, the sugars, the starches, the celluloses. It contains proteins such as amino acid, and it also contains lignins, and it can act as a structural component within the plant, these lignins. These are all going to end up being broken down into their smallest particle, and eventually they will be turned back into carbon. And we talked about this 2 lectures ago about the carbon cycle and how this organic material, this organic matter, is part of the carbon cycle, and this would be bringing us back to the start of the cycle where it is going to then be utilized by the plants again. So the process of decay is a biological oxidation of carbon, and what we're going to do is continually break down more and more and more of these organic materials into smaller and smaller products until we get humus. There are a few factors that affect the amount of organic material that are in the soil, and these have to do with how that soil has been utilized in the past. The number one factor is going to be vegetation, and so this is going to be what plants were grown in that soil previous to current. If it was used for grass or if it was a forest, you're going to have a lot of vegetation, a lot of leaf litter, a lot of lawn clippings. If the soil was not used for a landscaped purpose, you're going to have very little organic material within that soil. You just won't have a lot of leaves falling on the ground and then being able to be broken down into something that is more. Climate also has a very important aspect to this because of the moisture more than anything. When you have moisture, you're able to perpetuate bacterial activity and fungal activity faster than if it's in a drier climate. Also, as it gets warmer, moist climate is able to decay and break down materials faster than a drier, colder climate. Soil texture does happen to affect the amount of organic matter. The different soil textures hold on to organic matter differently, and it actually will change the soil texture of a soil if there is too much organic materials within the soil. Drainage can be affected by organic matter. If you have too much organic matter, your soil does not drain properly. And this happens because the organic material will act like a sponge, and it will help to hold on to water, but it can be to the detriment of plants and will not allow the plants to access that water. And then tillage is going to affect organic matter because it could push that organic matter beyond the root system, or it could mix it throughout the root system and make it harder for bacteria to break down organic matter. So organic matter is used to improve conditions in mineral soils. And when we say a mineral soil, that is just the basic components of the soil. When we talked about the sand, silts, and the clays, those are the mineral components of the soil. And then the organic material is what brings the soil to life. And so we've talked about this a little bit, but just kind of bringing it back in. If you have, say, a sandy soil, it will increase the water holding capacity and nutrient holding capacity if you add this organic material in. When you add organic material into a clay soil, it helps to improve the aeration and the ability for oxygen to develop within that soil and to be able to be accessed by the plants. When we look at nutrients, these humuses can store lots of nutrients for plants, and it's like a reservoir of material that the plants can utilize later on and can look for to have a stronger root system and a more healthy plant matter. So in essence, this humus is a natural fertilizer. When you've heard about organic fertilizers, sometimes we're utilizing the humuses that are within the breaking down of plants, and that's how we're putting fertilizer back into the soil. It does cause soil particles to clump together and form aggregates. This is because the soil organisms will help bind the soil, and this can be to detriment of the soil, but it's not something that is commonly occurs. Does help water infiltration because it will actually again act like a sponge, and it will draw that water into the soil and can open up pore space. But again, if it's in a large quantity, organic material can be to the detriment of plants because it will hold on to too much water, and it will take that water out of the system so that the plants don't have access to that water anymore. So one of the things that can be to the detriment of organic material is nitrogen can be taken out of the cycle by microbial bodies, and this is not available to plants. And this nitrogen is sequestered away from plants and can't be utilized by plants. So this isn't something that is very serious or something that you have to be super concerned with, but understanding that this is something that can happen is an issue. And then there are also certain plant residues that can be toxic to other plants. A really good example of this is a eucalyptus tree, and a eucalyptus tree gives off something called allelopathic chemicals, and these allelopathic chemicals can actually act as herbicides or sort of like pre-emergent herbicides that will kill small plants if they try to grow near these plants with these chemicals. These allelopathic chemicals are basically designed so that these trees and plants don't have to compete as hard for certain nutrients, and as they decay and die, they can be left within the soil where those plants used to exist. So managing soil organic matter can be very important because we want to maintain that organic matter at the highest practical level. We want to make sure that we have as much organic matter in the soil as possible to improve to get all the benefits that organic material can offer. So we want to make sure that we aren't doing certain things to the soil to lose those organic materials. So something we have to be careful with is tillage, because we can have organic material blow away if we are over tilling soil or tilling when it's dry. We want to make sure that we are utilizing the uh, materials that we're taking off. So when we're talking about crop residues, something that we can think about is lawn clippings or leaf litter, and these are all things that we want to make sure that we're able to reintroduce back into the soil. So composting or letting those break down, or even just letting them go back into the soil so that they can be broken down right there in the soil as they're used. You want to make sure that you are using cover crops, which is not something that we really work with, but if you are going to be working with a farm or other ranch area, you don't want to leave that area open so that the material can blow away. When we're rotating in new crops, we're reinfusing different organic materials into the ground, and having that balance of different organic materials can be to the benefit of future crops. So when we're looking at agricultural crops, we want to make sure that we're understanding that this is important to have different types of organic material with different nutrient loads, so that future or high value crops can have a higher yield because there's more nutrients in the soil. We also want to utilize mulch, and we want to manage the soil for having the correct amount of moisture. Again, this has to do with erosion and wind blowing these organic materials away. If we can maintain the proper amount of moisture within the soil, then we can be better off and have a stronger organic material presence within the soil. So nitrogen immobilization, this is something we talked about at the very beginning, but has to do with something called the carbon to nitrogen ratio, and something I will never forget, and I don't know why, but it's just something that you kind of pick up when you hear numbers, and I always remember the correct carbon to nitrogen ratio was 27 to 1, 27 carbons to 1 nitrogen. And when we introduce fresh organic material, we can throw off that balance. If anybody composts here, you might understand this through composting. And what you end up having is you have to have an equal part dry to equal part fresh in organic material. When you have these dry versus fresh, then you are able to have the correct carbon to nitrogen ratios. When you throw in this fresh organic material, you end up with a lot of ammonium in the mix, and you can have this nitrogen immobilization as a result. So when you're talking about something that is considered an organic soil, this is a soil that contains more than 20 to 30% of its organic material. Most often they're found in Alaska, Minnesota, Michigan, Florida, or Wisconsin. And these are formed from old marshes or bogs where there's a lot of plant material that piles on and piles on and piles on and piles on, and just continues to build and build and build, and keeps that organic material in the soil. Something you may have heard of is peat, which is basically an organic soil that has a lot of heavily decayed plant material within it. And this actually is the start of coal production. So this peat, after it's been compressed and compressed and compressed underneath the earth, can turn into coal. So these are where those things come from, a lot of those fossil fuels that you've heard, or other materials that are like that. So there are a couple technical terms that have to do with organic soils. There's fibric, that's going to be your slightly decayed. This is going to be your first portion. There's hemic, which is moderately decayed, and there's sapric, which is mostly decayed organic soil. So these are the three different stages of plant remains and organic soils. When we're talking about peat, going back to peat really quick, we are we can harvest this peat for both energy and for horticultural uses. And when we are harvesting for energy, we are utilizing this for heat. And one of the common processes in which we're doing this is we are going to, if you ever have had whiskey production, and peat is used as an energy to smoke and stop the portion of the soil of the plant that is starting to grow. So when we malt barley, we're actually starting the process of growing, and then we smoke peat to stop that process. We also can use this in horticulture, and what we end up having is a organic material that will hold on to water within the soil. So when you've heard of sphagnum peat moss, this is going to be added into a soil to ensure that we're having a good organic material within the soil that can hold on to water and can hold on to nutrients. And then we'll continue to break down within the soil to offer that soil more and more nutrients. Something about soil, organic matter, and global climate this organic material can affect local ecosystems, and it does become the Earth's largest resource of reservoir of carbon, and we can actually sequester carbon in our soil by allowing this organic material to be tilled back into the soil. We want to ensure that we are sequestering as much carbon so that it doesn't perpetuate into our system of climate change and offering less carbon within the atmosphere. So if we can utilize that carbon within the soil and we can take it out of the air, then we are doing the earth a favor. So in summary, we talked about a lot of things today about organic material, and we talked about how that organic material is made, what it's made up of. We talked about humus and how humification can be important. And then we talked about some of the organic material functions and how we manage for them. And then as we talked at the end there about organic soils and how organic soils can be utilized for both energy and horticultural productions. I thank you, and I hope that was a good lesson, and I will look to see you next time. Thank you.